going to talk today about some new research I've been doing, which is basically on how can we predict key organizational risks. And in this sense, I'm going to talk about performance, staff turnover, and burnout, and how happiness and other measures of happiness can predict these outcomes. So nice to see some people saying hi from where you are in the world, in Iceland. I'm going to very quickly start, and then I'm going to ask you a question very soon. So about your views on things. So just firstly, a brief bio of me that people don't know me. I am a statistician. Years ago, I went to Cambridge to read maths and found out I was a statistician. In the 90s, I did lots of work on quality of life studies, became a management consultant and things. And I also trained as a therapist, which I think gives me a little bit of a different twist on happiness and statistics, certainly. And in the 2000s, I did probably the work I'm best known for, which is I founded a centre at a think tank in London on well-being and national policy, and gave a TED talk about that in 2010. And then since then, I've been working on work, and we launched Friday Pulse in 2018, 2019. So this is the question we're going to ask ourselves is does happiness predict 3 organizational risks? We know that team happiness is a nice to have, that, clearly people prefer working in organizations that look after team happiness and well-being, but is it actually going to help organizations become more successful? And the 3 risks I'm going to look at are low performance, always something people worry about. High staff turnover costs them more than they realize, and burnout. When people get burnt out, it's certainly not great for them. And can happiness start to predict these types of indicators? And what I'd really appreciate you is that Angela, my co-host, is going to put up a poll now. And just like for you, which of these is the most important risk that you think your organization needs to tackle? So if you can look at that, that would be great. And vote. And then if you've got any comments, anything you're particularly thinking, questions that arise for you about these 3 topics of performance, turnover, and burnout. I'm going to go into the data. This is going to be a little bit of a nerdy webinar. That's why I'm doing it on my own rather than a guest. Often I have a guest on these webinars at Friday Pulse. But this is going to be very data rich, but it also gets to a very interesting point with the data. So and I'm glad someone loves nerdy. I like to get nerdy sometimes. So if you've got any particular comments on any of those 3 about one's a particularly thorny issue or something you're struggling with on them or something like that, that would be super interesting to hear. And while you're thinking about whether you've got a comment and you're doing the poll, I'm just going to share a couple more graphs and then we'll go back to the results of the poll. Oh, that was the poll. I want to introduce our core model at Friday Pulse that we've developed. And at the heart of it is happiness, happy teams particularly. And there are drivers of happiness at work, so things that are driving that, and happiness itself drives other outcomes. So we can see what these are. So we call these drivers the 5 ways to happiness at work, and I talk about the outcomes as being the 7 successes. And these are very dynamic. They are going around, the energy is flowing around. So the drivers drive happiness, happiness drives the successes, but the successes also drive happiness itself, and happiness can also help create better cultures in an organization. And if you flesh those out, the 5 drivers I talk about as being connect, be fair, empower, challenge, inspire. So if you're a Friday Pulse client, you'll know these very well. We measure these every quarter with you. But these are the key drivers about things. So you can see in there, if you want to, Maslow, sort of a hierarchy, though it would be the other way up. Inspire would be at the top, like transcendence in that sense, about meaning, purpose, inspire. You can see other models in there. So if any of you follow self-determination theory, you can see that in there. And basically, the ones that tend to get forgotten in organizational context are be fair, which is, we need fairness in the system, and sometimes relationships can do too. So that's the core model I'm going to use in this webinar, how I examine the data. So Luciana says, so firstly, the poll results is that most of you are interested in burnout. So I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about them in order. So we'll get to burnout. And my concern really is on the just before burnout possible actions. Yeah, well, I've certainly identifying some risks there, and we can talk about actions that you can do. Burnout's hard, difficult to spot as we go along. Will the slides be available afterwards? Yes, they will. They will, and there'll be recording available too. So that's the dynamic model, and that's going to form the core of my statistical analysis. So if any of you else have got any other sort of general thoughts on the three of them, then please put them in there and I'll try and pick them up. So let's get to the 7 successes of happy teams, which is that they are stable, that happy teams are stable. They've got lower staff turnover, effectively. They're more energetic. People have got more energy in positive teams. They're more collaborative. They're more creative. They're more attractive. And by that, I don't mean they're better looking, though maybe they are. I mean that they're going to attract talent towards them. They're going to attract projects towards them. They're going to attract support towards them. They're more effective and they're more profitable. And that feedback comes back, that builds on each other. And actually, there's a lot of data to support that. This is a very good study from quite some time ago now, but from Jim Harter, where he looked at the performance and the and just shutting down the chat in a minute because it's in my way. Sorry. He's looking at the performance and the happiness of teams. He looked across a lot of organizations. He looked at them 6 months apart, and the relationship between the two of them. And what he found was that financial success did predict team happiness at time too. So that's basically saying happiness drives performance. But he also found that success drives performance, which we know people feel good when they're successful, but also happiness drives performance. And actually, if you look at the correlation coefficients here, the beta coefficients, which we'll be looking at later, the beta coefficient from team happiness towards financial success is twice as strong. And that's really what this feedback loop is here. So that basically the happiness is driving the successes drives the happiness. But the reason that it's only in dotted lines and lighter is that it's probably half the effect size from accomplishment, from achievement to back towards happiness than from the other way around. But that's a key part of Friday Pulse and my work is how do you get happiness and success to build on each other? And in a way, this webinar is exactly about that topic. So we've already looked at the results on those. So more of you are interested in burnout or felt that was a bigger problem than turnover or performance, which is interesting to know, actually. Now, another great piece of research, which is about performance again, is from Oxford University, which is looking at the happiness of call operators. And the reason I want to show this is because it is the one proof of causality. So my data I'm going to show is correlational. It is longitudinal correlational, so it's predicting through time, but it's still not actually a proof of causality technically. But Oxford, Jean-Emmanuel Denis and colleagues at Oxford really have proved that. So their research design was that they had lots of call operators at different call centers in the BT across the UK. BT is a telecoms company. 90% of the calls were inbound, which meant that they weren't having to prospect. So it's a very clean way of thinking about what the effect is. Happiness was measured weekly, as was sales. So they asked people overall, how happy did you feel this week? And they were able to show that happier operators sold more in any given week. We haven't teased out the causality here. It could be that they're happy because they've sold more. So there's, They did find that the effect was 13%, but they did find actually happier operators through the weeks, tracking the same people through time. On the weeks they were unhappy, they sold less than the weeks they were happy. Again, not a proof of causality, but is starting to say that if you shift people's mood, they're going to sell more, which is interesting in itself. So, as I said, it's only indicative. And the way that they teased it out and why there's having 11 different sites across the UK was so good was they looked at the British weather. So we're renowned in the British weather for talking about it so much because it varies a lot. And so the sun shines more in Cornwall and Glasgow. So Cornwall's at the bottom, Truro. Scotland, Dundee, Glasgow are at the top. So we're going to have different weather across the UK. It also varies day to day, which again is going to become important. And what they were able to find was that on the weeks that the sun shone, the operators felt happier and they sold more. And that is a causal pathway because you could sell more and become happier, but you can't become happier and make the sun shine. That just isn't going to happen. So you could misremember whether the sun shine, but it's not actually going to make the sun shine. So basically the sun is shining, making people happier and therefore them selling more. And that is a causal pathway. There is one possible alternative, which is the sun could shine. It could make customers happier and they could buy more. But they were able to tease that out by looking at the individual weather. So really, fortuitously, because this wasn't the design thing, it's just what happened. When a customer rang in, they were routed to where the next available operator was, which was not necessarily their local one. In fact, nothing to do with being their local one. So they could be calling from anywhere and they would end up anywhere in the UK. So you could see the difference between the weather from where the customer was calling and where the operator was answering. And in that way, they were able to eliminate the idea that it was this effect here. So this is the first time. It took them 5 years to get this to publication. It is that difficult and thorny to get causality. So don't be surprised that I have strongly indicative data about prediction rather than absolutely a technical statistical proof. I haven't had 5 years to look at this data, but it doesn't answer exactly why. And that is important because that's going to be important if we think about the whole successes. That basically it's still saying they became operator, they sold more, but doesn't say how happiness helps them sell more. And this is very interesting. They looked at different types of calls, so simple order taking, more complicated contracts, and recontracting, often with unhappy customers. Note the increasing complexity of these calls. So becoming more and more complex. And what they found was that happiness made absolutely no difference to routine calls. It made a difference to contracts, and it made a very big one to negotiated calls. So in other words, feeling positive helps us deal with complexity. And this really matters in our teams. So in this instance, the call operators could go off script, literally. They can be spontaneous. They can see the customer's point of view. It's called mentalizing. It's your ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes. If you're in a bad mood, we're very in our own stuff, aren't we? Whereas if we're in a good mood, we can look out to the world and engage with it. So if you want engaged employees, that's really important. They can de-escalate situations. They can problem solve with them, and they can find a solution together. So that is why happiness is so important in our teams. And if you look at it here for the 7 successes, it's meeting the collaborative, creative, and effective ones. I mean, if they were another sales team and they had doing prospecting, then actually they would probably attract customers to them because people would hear that they were doing something good. And also stability is good in a team. If you're in a customer facing role, say hospitality, people like coming back to the same staff. Energy also matters. All of these matter, but particularly it dealt with those 3. And that really shows how happiness is very what's the word? I was going to say persuasive, pervasive. It gets into quite a lot of things and it's going to actually make a lot of good outcomes. So those seven successful team things lead the business outcomes. So lower staff turnover, less burnout, more integration across the organization, no silos, more innovation, more talent attraction, more productivity, and the profitable one is more share price growth. But today I'm just going to look at these 3: turnover, burnout, and performance, and how the dynamic model, how the 5 ways and happiness in turn affects it. Now, just to unpick and get under the hood of the 5 ways a minute, Connect, Be Fair, Empower, Challenge, we operationalize these. Well, they're constructs. Firstly, they could be called relatedness, justice, autonomy, development. Those are the sort of posh psychological words. I try and make words which are friendly, easy to use, and also lean into action. So, you know, Connect, Be Fair, Empower, Challenge, Inspire. So we measure these with 3 questions each. So underneath them, the Connect ones are how you get on with your team, how good teams are working together, and whether you've got good friendships at work. The Be Fair is about whether you're treated respectfully and fairly at work. The appreciation is, are you noticed for what you're doing? And the work-life balance is obviously how, you know, how much does work fit in with your life and respect your life in lots of ways. The Empower is using your strengths. You know, when we use our skills, we do better. It's your freedom to be yourself and influence the decisions around you. Challenge, about stretch and learning, really. So learning, feedback and creativity. And Inspire is sort of meaning and purpose. So it's worthwhile work. Do you feel proud what the organization does? Do you get a sense of accomplishment? And so in this bit of analysis, oh, by the way, if you want to try that questionnaire out, you can go to friday1.com and you do the questionnaire and it'll give you a report, just if you want to see what the questionnaire looks like in more detail. So how does the dynamic model do in predicting these? So this is my research model, which is I'm actually using 16 questions, which is the employee happiness, and then all of those 15 questions. How do they together impact turnover, burnout, and performance? They obviously interrelate between each other. There's covariance with them, and of course, the 15 questions are designed to their purpose, you know, primarily is to predict employee happiness, because, you know, that's what Friday Pulse does, but it's going to secondarily predict these outcomes. So I've got 3 data sets I can use to do this. So in the beginning of last year, just over a year ago, we did a representative sample. You know, we paid for the research for 1,500 people in the UK. That's one survey. It's cross-sectional. The second one was at the beginning of this year. We did an optional research module within Friday Pulse with our clients' employees. It's important, it's optional, I'll explain. And then we can track Friday Pulse users throughout the year because we have their data. Not that we know who it is, but, you know, there's a code which enables me to merge data sets in that way. So those are the 3 data sets I'm going to use. So the first one was a representative sample of the UK. We had it across all sorts of sectors. There's the percentage across sectors. We had it across all the regions of the UK. And we had male, female, and age splits, which are spread rightly. So it's a pretty good representative sample. There's a tiny bit of use of post-sampling weights just to level up a couple of things. But that's a very standard statistical methodology. The respondents were asked 60 questions altogether, and because I did various modules and stuff, but the bits I'm going to look at today are their overall happiness at work, the 15 questions on the 5 ways, whether they felt their team was successful. I'll show you that question in a minute, whether they intended to quit in the next 6 months, and whether they were experiencing burnout. Again, I'll show you those questions later. Note that it's a cross-sectional survey. The big advantage of it is it's representative, but what that means is it's not predictive because I've got everybody at the same point of time. So I'm going to use this as a check of my model. So it's always good to have another data set to check, sense check what you're doing. That isn't just something weird about your own data set. So I'm able to use this to do my analysis with the other 2 data sets and come back and use this as a check. It does have this strong advantage that it's representative, okay? The opt-in client research model was a double opt-in. So clients could say, no, we don't want to, we're too busy. Respondents could then opt out. Okay, that's going to create a bias. I've got over 1,000 responses across 100 different teams, and we had 10 questions on team success and effectiveness. Exactly the same question used in the other sample, but then a couple of extra ones. Burnout, exactly the same question, a couple of extra ones. And then we also asked about the use of Friday Pulse. So the pros are that we've got the team success and burnout questions that we can check back to the representative sample. We can also link to prior scores, which will be the 3rd data set. The con is there's a selection bias, which is that basically our happier clients opted in, our unhappier ones didn't, and unhappier end users were more likely to opt out than happier ones. They're more likely to open the questionnaire that week as well because people respond more. So I've got a double bias that moves people towards being happier than the average across our client data set and the UK data set. So there is a selection bias in there, and it was just something to be aware of. The third data set was tracking all Friday Pulse users during 2023, and we tracked them throughout the year. We did 4 measures of our questionnaire, and we could see if a user was retired, and it meant they left the organization. So the advantage is that it's a longitudinal study and that predictive analysis is possible. The con is it's not representative. It is all of our clients. So actually for tracking leaving, we don't have that problem with people being unhappy or happy because we still see they leave. So the only problem would be that they've never responded. But apart from that, it's all right. So the predictive model is basically at time 1, answering these questions and then looking at these outcomes at time 2. And we're going to look at low performance first. And when I've done low performance, I'm going to stop to see if you've got any questions because I've covered quite a bit just now. So we've got the 15 questions and we can look at them. So users were asked to assess how well their team was performing. So performance is tricky, notoriously difficult to measure in self-reports, right? So I asked about team performance to give some people some psychological distance from it. And the 3 questions asked were, do you feel that you and your colleagues collaborate well? Do you have a clear understanding of your team's objectives and goals? And once you've been asked that question, how successful do you think your team is, basically in terms of meeting your business goals and objectives? And everyone could just, every time they could respond on this 1 to 5 scale. So I've got 3 measures there that move towards team success. And if I look at the data on them, as I said, self-reports are slightly biased. We've also got to remember we've got people here who are happier, so they're likely to be higher performing than our average Friday Pulse client. So for each of these, approximately 20% of people gave a score of 3 or below, and 80% of people said it was good or very good, okay? Which is probably, as I said, an overestimate. But what we can do is we can merge the 3 together and basically say that actually a high-performing team is if you've got to get good on all 3 of those, and then it reduces it to 66%. So that's going to differentiate it a little bit more, spread it out a little bit more. I've got 3 indicators I can merge together, create a bigger scale, more predictive, all sorts of things. So this is it. I just categorize them, but basically when I was actually doing the analysis, I had basically taken a mean across all 3 of them, an average across all 3 of them. So going to look at the risk of someone falling into this category is effectively what we're doing. And we can use all of these variables that we have, but a whole quarter before. So basically in the last quarter of 2023, what were their scores on these? And what was the outcome in terms of their performance, which we got measured in the research module in the beginning of the year. So which ones actually enter a regression model, a linear regression model, where, you know, and the answer is it's these 5. Is the employee happiness enters, team relationships, team cooperation, feedback, and accomplishment. Those are the 5 variables that together are predicting that someone is classifying their team as successful by those 3 variables that I just showed you. And so if we look at these in a bit more detail, we can look to see, so these are the 5 predictors on the left, and I've ranked them, I put them in order that they enter my equations, which means that accomplishment, do people feel they're accomplishing something, which in some ways makes sense, but in a sense of accomplishment is the first that predicts that the team is going to have good performance. The second is that they cooperate across teams. The third is that they cooperate within teams. The 4th is that they get good feedback. And the 5th is happiness. Now that means happiness is adding extra variance on top of those. All of those are predictors of happiness themselves, but on top of that, happiness has like a double effect. It's got a very good R-squared, 46%. That's pretty good in this sort of thing. So that's a pretty interesting, good model. Of course, I need to think about it a bit more. So, you know, do we need all 3 questions in this model? And probably the collaborate one could be a little bit, you know, I've got Do you get on well with your team? Do teams collaborate across the organization? So it's probably worth looking at it without that one. And we can also just look at the success only. So the success only one is just using the last question. So we have primed it. So that's interesting. People should be answering it correctly. We can also compare that question back to the survey we've done before. And you can see that if I do success only, the R squared has dropped to 28%. Excluding collaborate, it is 38%. So they're still pretty good. And actually, if I just use those two goals, the beta coefficients change slightly. So team relationships moves to the bottom, which kind of makes sense. And team relationship is sort of about collaboration, isn't it? So, but team cooperation is still high. Feedback moves up. Happiness is still there. It's still the same 5 variables. I can also go and check it in a regression in the 2023 population. Still the same variables. Actually, team cooperation comes out highest. Accomplishments a bit lower. Not really sure why, but this is exactly why we check things. It gives us a sense check. So if we look at them all together, we can see the beta coefficients vary. But if you look at those across them, you can see that basically they all look about equal in their impact. They're sort of 0.15-ish if you sort of mean across them. And so in a predictive model, I would say take these variables, give them equal weights, and it's sort of going to be the best fit. And so if we're assessing team performance, it's these 5 factors that consistently across 2 different data sets predicted it. I will, when I get some more time, see if the quarter before predicts it too, but you're getting a little bit far away from the variable. But basically, accomplishment, feedback, team cooperation, team relationships, plus an extra effect of happiness, that basically happiness on top of that is predicting them. And so we can actually just create some evidence-based ways to improve team performance based on this, which is that have clear objectives and give consistent constructive feedback on how doing. That's not rocket science, but it's absolutely there in the data. Building strong team relationships and supportive relationships between teams is really important. If you're an organization with silos, how annoying it is, you can't get on with other teams, or if you haven't got them within your team, that's going to be really important. And then on top of that, looking after the happiness of teams is going to boost it. But there's strong evidence for all 3 of those that's the way to improve performance. And it's in ways it's just helping us kind of focus on that. And I thought I would just have a pause there to see if there are any questions. I can see something in the chat now, and from Luciana, but anyone else who's got them, please ask any questions now. You can put it in the QA there or not. So Luciana, you've asked, would the leaders or department heads have a preview of these rubrics? Not sure I quite understand what you mean. So if you mean everybody in Friday Pulse sees their own results and they see their team's results. So teams would be aware if their scores were going down. And that's ultimately where I want to go with this. Yeah. Stephanie, thanks. Yeah, happiness is viewed as fluffy and only a nice to have. Measuring it is a critical part of our strategy. And I think measurement, yeah, as it does, it grounds it. So I often use the expression happiness is a serious business. In fact, I'm writing a book on that title at the moment. And I think having the data makes it much easier to take it seriously and to show how it's predicting it. So that's what I've been doing this analysis, sort of been thinking about this for the last couple of months, this analysis, is how can we show that happiness is not a nice to have, but it's more of an essential. And I think looking at the independent effect of the variables is really helpful. Has anyone else got any other questions or comments before I move on? The chat will show me if something pops up. Okay, so now I want to go on to a levers analysis, so staff turnover. So we can identify the date that people are retired from Friday Pulse. So someone goes into the system and retires that license. So basically Friday Pulse is a license that people get for monthly basis or annual basis, but you buy licenses as an organization or a team. You can change people in that license. Basically, if someone leaves, you can bring a new user to fill that license spot. So we know everybody who left, everybody lives. And so what I've taken in this data is everybody who left in Q1 of this year. So January, February, March of this year. And we can check how happy they were in Q4 last year. So October, November, December. And we can investigate also which other variables predict leaving. But it's the same model, really. These 16 questions, who left the organization. Note that this is a 1-0 variable. People left or they didn't. Whereas the success variable was a scale. So this is going to make my linear regressions less powerful. However, we can see very clearly in the data what's going on. So this is exactly the leavers, people who left in Q1, what percentage of people did. And you can see nearly 30% of people who were very unhappy that last quarter had left, and only 8% of those that are happy had. It's a nice curve. We see this across all of our data, a curve like this. But remember, this is data happiness of 3 months before. So it's not the day they're leaving that they're unhappy, it's 3 months before. So this is really where I think the power of the data is going to be shown. This is the same sort of question in that cross-sectional survey, except in that cross-sectional survey, I can't actually see whether people are leaving. So I asked them a question about, do they intend to leave? And these are people who said they were very likely to leave actually in the next 6 months. So 60% of the very unhappy said they were very likely to leave, which is kind of interesting because this one has 30% of people did leave, and that was in a quarter. So it's roughly the same scale. You can see the unhappy is roughly the same. The okay is a little bit lower, actually, and the happy and the very unhappy. So actually, maybe we underestimate how much okay is going to motivate us to leave, only being okay, that not being good. So actually, when we say about our intention, we're saying, yeah, it's okay. But actually, okay gets at you after a while. So people more okays leave than they think they're going to leave. It's kind of helpful. That's sort of what you want with this data is to give you information you don't know. So if you're consistently okay at work, probably should think about it, as in, talk to your team leader, what's going wrong for you, what's not, how can you fix that? Because it will grind you down. Okay will grind you down after a while. Same model, staff turnover. And these were the ones that predicted it, which were employee happiness. Were you treated fairly? How's your work-life balance? Those were the 3 variables that were predicting whether people left. We've already seen employee happiness does. I showed you that graph. But when you do the analysis, oh, by the way, there's a hint in the data of organizational pride and accomplishment mattering. In other words, if you don't really love what your organization's doing, maybe it's a lower point that you'll find it easier to leave. If you don't feel you're accomplishing anything, you probably get a bit bored and frustrated there. But the ones really driving it are happiness, respect, and work-life balance. And the betas are lower scores just because it's a 1-0 variable. That doesn't really matter. The R squared is lower again because you've only got so much variance in. You've got a 1 or a 0, but it's explaining a decent amount of a 1-0 variable there. But the happiness, look at it, is 3 times as strong as the respect. So happiness is the main thing driving, or unhappiness is driving staff turnover. Unhappiness purely itself driving it. Respect is something, if you get dissed at work, you get, it's going to make you angry. And, if you feel you're not being treated fairly, you're out the door. That makes sense. And work-life balance does too, though it's weaker. I put it in small numbers. It is statistically significant, but it's much lower in statistical significance. So, but you can see where that model looks like. If you do a slightly different regression model, you can see, I think that one, sorry, this one should actually be, say, the survey. Oh, it does say top right. This is the cross-sectional survey. You can see again, happiness is way the strongest, then respect, and then you get work-life balance, and the other 2 are entering the equations. Again, they're entering later on, they're sort of close to statistical significance. They are statistically significant. They would enter equations, but they're just slightly less robust. So The R squared's a bit better. You're in the same survey, so at the same time, so we'd slightly expect that. Actually, it shouldn't say left there. I forgot to change it. That is likely to leave. So I've got a mistake on that slide. But you can see there what it is. So this wouldn't be an equal weights model. Actually, I should really put it. Happiness should be double, respect should be 1, and the other should be a half. I've got the ratios right there. I meant to go back and change that. I changed it in a later slide. So happiness is a double weight here because it's so important. Respect, next most important variable, and the other 3 explain some variance as well. So if you're going to create a model for that, an index, I would be looking to weight it. The first one I wouldn't weight because they were roughly similar weights in it. So the 2 factors that most consistently predicted people leaving were unhappiness and feeling disrespected, and then other things, having a low work-life balance, a lack of pride, and not accomplishing things. So, and you can think about 2 evidence-based ways to reduce staff turnover tests, which is one is to consistently look after team happiness. It's going to happen. Things move very quickly. People get unhappy. They're leaving 3 months later, 30% of them. So, look after tackle unhappiness quickly. Remember that people who feel okay at work are more likely to leave than probably even they realize. Less likely than the very unhappy, but more than the unhappy. And pay special attention to treating people fairly, and respect. And that means everybody, actually, because when someone else sees someone else treated unfairly, that makes them angry. So unfairness is very contagious, the feeling of it is. So I'm going to pause again now to know if anyone's got any other questions. I can see something in the chat, which I'm going to go to now. But if you've got any other questions, then please just ask them now. Are you seeing a trend where you can predict possible leave from a job, i.e. Q1, Q2? Yes. So basically this, I don't know if I've answered that question for you, Michael, but I see in the earlier quarters. I have not as yet looked at that. So I have looked at it to see, does quarter 3's data predict staff turnover? And it does more weekly. I've looked at it to see, does it predict the same? Is it the same predictor as it is? What I really need to do is, so basically there should be, the strongest effect will be in the quarter before you leave, and there will be weaker effects in the quarters before. And they still, Michael, are the same variables predicting it. But the R squared would go down the further you move away from the event of them leaving. I just think this is generally telling us that looking after team happiness is really, really important, and treating people fairly across the organization is the most. Tracy, hi. How are you? Can I obtain data rate retired users and their quarter before results? That is a feature that we have thought about developing, and it's called levers reports. It's certainly been designed. I don't know, Angela. I don't know. Can you answer that? Can people turn on levers reports or not yet? Could you type it in the chat? But we're going to release some, or you can answer it, Angela. Yeah, come on and answer it.
Hi, yes, there isn't anything like that at the moment that you can turn on in terms of a levers report. I think it's about the anonymity of when you would have that information, isn't it? And so it's something that we'll need to dig into the how you can get that information so it's useful guidance for our clients.
Yes, that was the issue, wasn't it? It's statistically possible, Tracy. I'm going to show you. We definitely are going to start producing risk assessments later this year. I'll show you. I'll talk about that later. But and I think we should reconsider that about where the balance of that is. I guess if we had more than a group of 3 or 4 people had left, we could do it. If you just got one lever, then that would break our anonymity. So there's something to be thought about there. Question: tips for actually improving happiness and well-being from your research? Yes, Stephanie. I mean, I'm not absolutely going there today, but we have lots and lots of tips in our help center about it. I will touch on it towards the end, so I'll come back to that. Anybody else? I'm going to go on to burnout, which obviously is going to interest you all. So the burnout analysis, I asked questions on whether people felt burnt out in the research module. I also had it in the 2023 population survey. Warning, burnout is notoriously difficult to predict, especially by the person themselves. So we were asked at the beginning, how do we see the signs? I think that is the absolute thing going on. So what do we find? So this is basically the question I used during the last year. Have you experienced burnout? And I define burnout because I think it's a little bit slippery what it means. So burnout is defined as when someone is emotionally exhausted with their work efficiency suffering due to too much involvement in their work. And I gave people 3 possible answers. No, yes, a bit, yes, definitely. I basically wanted to force people into really thinking if they were definite. I then got asked people what their worst period was, because then I can line up the dates within my data. So same model. The predicting outcome is again 1, 0, 0, definitely felt burnt out. And these were the 2 questions that predicted it, which were poor work-life balance and a lack of appreciation. Notice happiness does not enter this equation at all, which is interesting. So it is these 2 variables. There is just a hint of 2 other things. So one of them was that using your strengths actually was a risk. And I think this is about the too much involvement, that when we feel we're really good at our job, we sort of feel only us can do it. And so there's probably maybe a little bit of getting carried away, or if you want to be more challenging, a bit of grandiosity that only you can do the work, that people, you know, don't think they can share it with their colleagues. So there's just something in that space. And then interestingly, I was looking at all sorts of things around the happiness. And because we've got a measure of happiness each week with our clients, you can look at things like their overall happiness score, the average. You can look at their response rate, and you can look at the standard deviation, like how much they vary. And actually, it was a slight risk if people kept on hitting the same button each week. So if they just kept on saying, okay, I guess, or maybe happy, they're basically not giving it any thought about the nuances going on in their work. And there was just a hint of that coming into the equations, you know, just sort of on the edge of statistical significance, which I found kind of interesting. You know, our questions are not designed to predict burnout. So I'm basically using what we've got to predict it, rather than necessarily how you might design something to predict burnout. But it's still interesting. And what do we see? We see that work-life balance was easily the most important, and lack of appreciation the second, and the strengths use was just this hint in there, going the other way. But the work-life balance was at least twice as high. And what that means is that it's not an equal weights situation. If creating a variable here, I'd be giving double weight to work-life balance and a single weight to appreciation. I don't think I would create a weight for using your strengths. But again, I think we could, you know, do that. And I think the evidence-based ways of reducing burnout is don't let people's work-life balance get out of control. And I put in brackets for too long. Of course, there's periods when work-life balance, you know, there's deadlines to meet, you know, lots of, you know, our clients are working very stressful situations. So of course there are issues there, but the trick is not to let it happen for too long. So if 2 months in a row work-life balance is down, that is definitely a risk for burnout. And probably where you might go with the question, Michael, is do earlier months predict it more? And actually, you're making me think I need to look at that a bit more. Like, is it 2 months of work-life balance down? And I will think about that a bit more, because, you know, yeah, I'll think about that some more. And I think it's really important to appreciate the hard work that people put in. So if they are working longer hours than normal, make sure that it is really recognized and really appreciated, because if they're doing that and then no one says thank you, that's going to increase the risk of burnout too. So are there any questions now about burnout? Oh, that's still the question from Stephanie. And there, yeah, Michael, I will in time look at that. I'll probably put a LinkedIn post on it sometime. So follow me on LinkedIn. Yeah, so those are the two evidence-based ones there. So really, just to sort of bring everything together, does happiness predict 3 organizational risks? Yes, it does. Low performance, high turnover, and burnout. It's the 3 data. It used 3 data with different strengths and weaknesses, analyzed over 8,000 respondents, and the predictive potential of happiness data was definitely confirmed by my analysis, which is a relief for me, because I always thought it was there, but actually, actually really checking it. I've definitely checked. We've definitely written before on it predicting people leaving, but to have the other 2 there is really helpful and confirming that actually we're asking the right set of questions. It was the strongest predictor, only the strongest predictor on 1, which was high turnover. Oh, sorry, I haven't got my reveals right, but high turnover was the one which it was the strongest predictor on by itself. It was the second one for low performance, and burnout, it didn't even enter the equations, happiness, which is interesting. It was other stuff that's predicting burnout. All risk predicted, the strongest prediction power was low performance, then high turnover, and the weakest was burnout. Notoriously difficult to measure, to assess. But if we look at the summary of predictors, then, performance, it was accomplishment, team cooperation, feedback, happiness, team relationships. Staff turnover was happiness, respect, work-life balance, pride, accomplishment. And burnout was work-life balance and appreciation. And if we look at the ones that are stronger, it's nice to see that they're actually all different. So accomplishment, cooperation, feedback, happiness, team relationships. We get happiness again. That's good. Next one here is really respect. And then we're into the smaller ones. Work-life balance, haven't had that yet, except as a smaller one here. And appreciation we haven't had yet. So we've actually got quite a few variables here, that are strongly predicting these outcomes. So what have we got? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right, 2, 4, 5, 6. We've got sort of at least half of them are doing extra work. But, note that they're all predicting happiness. So basically, you've got sort of pathways towards these successes, which is that you've got the normal pathway, which we've been using, which is, look after team happiness, these things will happen. And now we've got actually even more reinforced these other pathways, because those are the ones that might be driving the key things that you're worried about as an organization. So the key takeaways are that happiness is predictive of key organizational risks. Measuring happiness will help identify teams that need more support. Use Friday Pulse. Yeah, use Friday Pulse in a sense. So we've got something, a special offer coming soon. So you might already be a Friday Pulse client, but if you're not, or people that aren't, it's going to be called First Measure Free. If you sign up to our newsletter or follow me or Friday Pulse on LinkedIn, you will definitely hear about that. And our methodology normally is that you repeatedly measure. That's why we got 4 measures from a year, but you measure, you meet, and you repeat. So this questionnaire that's going to be the first measure free is the 15 questions that we're using to predict it, together with happiness questions, so 16. You need to analyze your results and identify areas for improvement, make positive changes, and then clearly repeat it and go around. And you get instant reporting for every team, and overviews for senior leaders. Coming later this year, we will create risk ratings. For those of you who use Friday Pulse, we have things like impact reports, we have heat maps. We'll create the equivalent of those, but for these risk indicators. And they will be different for different teams, because the variables are different predicting it, which means, it's why that I feel I could create 3 risk indicators. You can just say low happiness is a risk, and it is, but that's rather dull. And when it's important, but I can understand why people just think, okay, but this actually would get more nuanced. And so that some organizations, do only worry about performance. I know you guys are more about burnout, but they would look at that. If you were more doing about burnout, you'd be looking at those burnout risks more going on. And there are ways of finding out more, but what someone put in the chat, just opening it up. I can heartily recommend Friday Pulse. Thank you, Tracy. We did a nice event together the other week. It was very good. You can follow me on LinkedIn and Friday Pulse. You can reflect on your own happiness at work at friday1.com. And we've got white papers, ebooks going on there, and use Friday Pulse in your team. That is the end of the webinar. I'm very, very happy to answer any questions that you have. It is very new research, and as you can see, Michael made me think I could do something else. I think research never ends; it always carries on. But I certainly feel confident enough that we got the basis for creating these risk indicators. And for those of you that took part in the research module, if you're a client of ours, thank you very much, because that data was super helpful in order to start teasing that out. That's still the tips for improving happiness and well-being from your research. So this is at work, Stephanie. Really the tips are there in the 5 drivers, which are that building good team relationships, treating people fairly, delegating, helping them, use their strengths, challenge and stretch. That really came out with the team success, didn't it? That basically, the feedback was really, really important for setting goals, and then ensuring that people have meaning and purpose. I mean, the biggest tip I can do really is in your daily, weekly work is what we call friction and flow, which is that I think too often in our work, we just go straight on to the next challenge. Work is pressurized, work is difficult, work is hard. In fact, I was just writing a bit in my book the other day that the adjective most used with the word work is hard. It's used about 4 or 5 times as much as the word good. So hard work rather than good work. Hard work is much more used. And I think that's what we think about work. It's hard. And I think it's that how do we acknowledge that and appreciate that in real time? And so the big design feature behind the weekly part of Friday Pulse is to just shout out what's gone well last week. What's gone out? What's gone well? Well done. Good job. How can we build on that? And that's really trying to help flow. And then deal with any frustrations in a week, which is to deal with anything that's annoying people. Be on top of those things. Taking half an hour a week to spend with your team, talking about what's going well and what isn't, will build stronger team relationships, which we know is going to help for that collaboration that you need. And it's going to make people feel more appreciated, respected, noted to keep on top of problems, and so, if you are in a particularly difficult part of work and there's long hours, then at least take the time to appreciate everybody to reduce that risk, and then make sure that you just don't go from one busy project straight to the next. Take a break, allow people to gather. What do they learn from the project? So make sure that you manage work-life balance very, very actively. And really that's about being on top every week. So, Friday Pulse measures that, but, one-to-ones are so critical there with people as well. In the chat, do you feel an improving trend in large corporations towards happier employees, or do employees look to smaller startups to use this? Well, okay, smaller startups, smaller organizations. So typically smaller organizations are happier than larger ones. Larger organizations, though, are better at being systematic often. So we see more well-being programs in large organizations and things like that. The efficacy of well-being programs is a little bit suspect. Quite a lot of them don't, I think, have a return on investment. So there are good and bad within both. As a general, smaller startups rather than small organizations are somewhat different because they're scaling, if they are, and they're very, very focused on performance. So they can be a little brutal sometimes. And so I think it really, really depends. So if it's a very aggressive sprint for growth, I think quite a lot of senior leaders and VCs are pretty cynical actually about employee happiness. But I don't think they should be, because if they're accumulating knowledge and they're going to need that as they grow, then actually That's important. And then if you are growing and you're losing people out the other door, that makes it twice as difficult to get, you have to get more and more people. So I think it's like leaky buckets in a customer funnel. If you have leaky buckets in your employee funnel, i.e. people are going out the door, you're not going to do nearly as well. So I think it's under-recognized in startups and scale-ups, but I think quite a lot of them don't actually deal with them. Any other questions from anybody? Really appreciate it if you could. Andrew, have you got the scoring thing for us or not? Didn't ask you for it explicitly. The rating of the webinar. Yes. Thank you, Angela. She's on top of it. It's always good for us just to rate them, just for me to understand which ones work for you. This was a more nerdy one for certain. I hope it satisfied your inner nerds, and it certainly has satisfied my inner nerd doing the research and creating the presentation, and feeling pretty confident about the data. Actually, unfortunately, the burnout is the weakest of the three predictors, but I think it's still helpful actually, and I think they're useful. It creates useful data from that. Thank you very much.